So Dr. Shook has got to do more than just destroy those bridges he claims I'm trying to build across the chasm. He's got to show that there's nothing on the other side to get to, that there is nothing beyond the physical world. Trouble is, he can't do it. He admits that reason, science, and experience can't establish naturalism, and therefore naturalism is fundamentally incoherent. When it comes to establishing its own foundations, it requires outside assistance, which means, in his own words, that it is incomplete and therefore false. So we've seen no good reason tonight to think that naturalism is true. It's a huge lacuna in tonight's debate. Now, what about the arguments that I gave to show that supernaturalism is true? Number one, I suggested that the origin of the universe points beyond nature to a transcendent cause of the universe. The fact is that nature had a beginning in the finite past and came into existence. And since something can't come out of nothing, there must be a transcendent cause. Now here Dr. Shook responds to my philosophical arguments for the beginning of the universe by saying that we shouldn't take or consult mathematicians about what exists. Now that surprised me when he said that, because that's my point. That's what I'm saying, is that if something is mathematically possible, that doesn't mean it can really exist. And indeed, with respect to the infinite, you can show that self-contradictions arise if you try to subtract infinity from infinity. If you have an infinite number of baseball cards, you can give every odd-numbered card away, and you're going to wind up, as I say, with self-contradictions when you take infinity from infinity. So that's my point, is that mathematics is not a guide to reality. Indeed, there are things that might be possible to do mathematically, but they're not meaningful or possible physically. So I don't think he's been able to deal with the logical contradictions that would result if an infinite number of things could actually exist. What about the evidence for the beginning of the universe from contemporary cosmology? Here he says, well, maybe a multiverse will avoid the beginning. Again, I've already refuted that in my opening speech. The Born-Guth-Vilenkin theorem, developed in 2003, shows that any universe, including an inflationary multiverse, cannot be extended infinitely into the past. You reach a past space-time boundary in a finite amount of time, about 13.7 billion years ago. So we have both good philosophical arguments, that's reason. We have scientific evidence, that's science. Two of the arbiters of truth proposed by the naturalist that both point to a beginning of the universe, and therefore to a transcendent cause. Now, Dr. Shook says, but God would be a timeless person, and that's just inconceivable. How is that any better than an infinite past? Well, an infinite past isn't just unimaginable. It leads to logical contradictions, as I said. But I don't see any logical incoherence in the idea of a timeless person. A timeless person would simply be a changeless, self-conscious being who exists outside of our four-dimensional space-time continuum. That is the traditional concept of God, all the way going back to Aristotle. This is nothing new. This isn't, what did he call it, theology at the edge. This is the traditional classical concept of God, that God is the creator of time and space and exists outside of time and space. So I don't think he's been able to refute either of those two premises, that whatever begins to exist has a cause. We have good grounds for thinking the universe began to exist, and it follows deductively from that that therefore the universe has a cause. Now, what about my second argument for the fine-tuning of the universe and not being due to physical necessity or to chance, and therefore due to design? Here, I saw no refutation other than some vague reference to natural imperfections in the universe. But notice my argument here isn't appealing to biological evolution. My argument is not denying that. It's fully compatible with the typical Darwinian story. I'm going back to the initial conditions of the universe, which in recent years have been discovered to be fine-tuned for the existence of intelligent life with a precision and delicacy that is simply incomprehensible. And you've got to explain this by either saying it's physically necessary, but that contradicts everything that physics is telling us about these constants and quantities, or else you've got to say that it resulted from chance alone. And I looked at the attempt to defend chance by the multiverse hypothesis and gave two arguments against it. So I think that argument still stands. What about objective moral values? I said that if God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. But in moral experience, and again, experience is one of the arbiters of truth for the naturalist, we apprehend a realm of objective moral values from which it follows that God exists. Now here Dr. Shook says, He believes that there are objective values, but not absolute values. But notice how he defines objective. Objective is something that we can all agree on. Well, I don't think that on the naturalist view there are even objective values in that sense. The psychopath doesn't agree that it's wrong to torture and rape little children. The Nazi National Socialists didn't think it was wrong to send Jews and gypsies to the gas chambers. The apartheid-supporting Afrikaner in South Africa didn't think there was anything wrong with racial discrimination. You see, these moral principles on Dr. Schuch's naturalism are objective only in the sense that the recommendations for agriculture are objective. It is objectively true that if you want to grow corn, then you should use fertilizer. That's an objective principle. Similarly, if you're a psychopath and you want to have the greatest pleasurable experience, then you ought to torture and rape your victims. It's objective in that sense. You see, he says that moral values are just practical prescriptions of recommended actions for achieving a certain goal. And those goals are relative to each individual, to various societies, whether Nazi Germany society, apartheid South Africa, killing fields in Cambodia, communist Soviet Russia, they're relative, or relative to the human race. It doesn't matter. All of these are equally valid. So it seems to me that it's very clear that on Dr. Schuch's view, there are not objective values in the sense that these are valid and binding apart from human opinion, except in the sense that these are these practical recommendations. If you want to do this, then you should do that. And that, as I say, is massively, massively contrary to moral experience. So if you agree with me that it is better to love a little child and nurture him rather than to torture and rape that little child, if you think there is a moral difference between those two, then you should agree with me that God exists. On the naturalist's view, there is no way to found a realm of objective moral values, because in nature, whatever is right. We are just a relatively advanced primate species and have no more intrinsic value than a species of bonobo or apes. What about the resurrection of Jesus? I pointed out that today historians agree on the fact of the empty tomb, the appearances of Jesus, the origin of the disciples' belief. These are historical facts, again, what the naturalist would appeal to. And therefore, they need some explanation. How do you explain these? I can't think of any better explanation than the explanation the disciples gave, that God raised Jesus from the dead. Dr. Schuch responds by saying, well, you're taking the Bible as your authority. No, I am not. I am treating the Bible as an ordinary collection of historical documents comparable to Thucydides or Herodotus or other ancient works, and investigating them historically, and these are the facts that historians have determined as a result. So I'm not appealing to the authority or inspiration of the Bible here, but treating them as ordinary historical documents. Finally, what about immediate experience of God? He says, well, experiences are relative, that people have experiences of Krishna. Right. And I would say that a person has a right to believe in what he experiences unless he has some sort of a defeater for that experience, unless there's some reason to think that he is deluded or incorrect. He has a right to go on the basis of that experience, and experience is one of the means of truth that the naturalist believes in. So why does he deny religious experience? Why exclude that as part of the rich human tapestry of experience? It seems to me that in the absence of any defeater, any argument for atheism, and we've not heard one tonight, I'm perfectly rational, perfectly within my rights to continue to believe on the basis of my experience that God exists.